and welcome to Equals, the podcast about inequality. I'm Grazielle.
And I'm Max, and today's episode is quite exciting. We are going to be looking back over the season and highlighting some of the most amazing interviews that we've managed to do and talking a bit about them to encourage you all to go back and listen.
And after a very special selection between the presenters, the two of us were selected to do this wrap-up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously our other presenters, Annie and Naf, are good, but we were the best. So we're going to do the wrap-up, aren't we? So, I mean, I think a good place to start is probably the one and only episode that we did together, no? So that one was with two of my heroes, Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson. And it was all about the power of equality, wasn't it?
Wow, that episode was really interesting. And you know, something that I really liked it in this episode is the way that they highlight how more equal societies are much safer, happier, healthier, and more democratic for people to live.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the sheer power of more equal societies and what lovely places they are. And I'll always remember that episode because of the story you told of when you went for the first time from Brazil, one of the world's most unequal countries, where you come from, to Denmark, one of the most equal. And you arrived late at night. You were a bit worried about security, and the host said, "Don't worry, just get the train into Copenhagen." And then you saw all these bicycles lined up outside the station, and you realized none of them had locks on. And people were still cycling around. It was perfectly safe to walk to your accommodation. And yeah, just that first experience of a country that is so equal, with the kind of trust and the safety that comes with that. Yeah, that was a good story.
Oh, wow. That was really mind-blowing for me. I'm never going to forget the feeling of safety that I had there. And then Kate talked it back, and she said that she had a similar story, but on the contrary, when she traveled from the UK to South Africa, and she saw lots of bars on the windows, and she felt this heavy feeling of not being safe. So it's interesting to see that the feelings and how we see the world has a lot to do on the inequality of the countries where we are born and where we live, right?
Yeah, and I think, the vast majority of people don't get to compare. So most people live in very unequal countries because sadly they are the majority. And most people probably think that's just the way things are. And I think it's really sad because I wish everyone in the world would get an opportunity to go to Denmark and get an idea of what is really possible, because otherwise I think people just assume that security guards and bars and fences and slums and they're just normal, which I think is really sad.
It's true. And I really wish that we can go farther, that we can see and we can really promote this change, that we can have more equal countries everywhere. And I believe that what we're doing here in this podcast is exactly that, bringing the knowledge for us to promote those changes. So that's really good to do.
Yeah, and it's good to be positive, isn't it? Because we talk so much about the scale of inequality, and that episode was about the power of equality, which was really lovely. Now, listen, you did so many more episodes than me this season. I have to say I've been a bit lazy. So of the many other interviews you did, what would be another one that stood out for you, Grazie?
One that really called my attention was one we did with one economist from Positive Money. His name is Jordi Schroder. And we were talking about monetary policy and inequality. And this really stood out for me because normally when we are saying we need to have better economic policy to reduce inequality, we usually talk about tax or expenditure or how to finance social policies. But we don't usually talk about should we increase or reduce interest rate to reduce inequality? How does inflation impacts inequality? Or what about the swaps that central banks do and the impact they might have in inequality? Most of us don't even know what these are. So when Jordi came and explained, and we are able to see the impact that this has, it was huge. And in truth, we know this because we go to the supermarket, and when we see the price, the inflation, we can see how this has a huge impact in our lives too, right?
Absolutely. I think I found that episode super interesting. I really learned things I didn't know, and I've explored it further since. This idea that, which is really a kind of neoliberal idea, that monetary policy is almost above politics. That it's technical, it's about experts, and there's no choices really to be made. There's a kind of right answer. And that's just not true. If you're a government and you choose to really target getting inflation down, so you jack up interest rates really high, then that will have a really profound and important impact on inequality in the country. I mean, it could still be the right thing to do. It might be the wrong thing to do. But the idea that it's not linked to inequality, and inequality is all about taxing and spending, and I mean those things are very important too, but yeah, the monetary side of things is important. So I thought that was really helpful.
Yes. And what about you, Max? As we know, you didn't do so much episodes this season, but among the few ones that you did, which one would you like to highlight for us?
Well, I suppose the interview that was most interesting for me was the one about colonialism that we did with Jason Hickel around about the time of the Davos paper. Our Davos paper this year, which is our biggest report as Oxfam, was all about the issue of extreme wealth and colonialism. And I learned so much writing that paper, and I've learned so much from Jason and his writing. So the opportunity to talk to him was wonderful. And it was a really popular episode. I mean, thousands of people listened to it. But I think, there are two, I think, big takeaways for me from that. And the first one for me is really mapping out the historical basis of extreme wealth. Like today's extreme wealth, today's billionaires are still massively found in the rich countries of the global north, particularly Europe and America, and that this is not an accident, that is linked back to their dominance of the world economy during the colonial period, particularly with Europe. And here in my country, in the UK in particular, how many of our famous stately homes, where these aristocrats, live with all of their money, can be traced back to robbing from India or slavery. And basically this point that, when we look at extreme wealth inequality today, we can't understand it properly and understand its solutions properly unless we look back at history and at colonialism. So that for me was really, really interesting. What about you? What did you think about that? Because this is a topic you know a lot about, Grazie.
Well, something that was really interesting for this episode was the timing, because you did this interview and it was at the same time that Oxfam was releasing its Davos report called Takers and Not Makers, and that it was exactly on the same subject about how colonialism has a huge impact on inequality. Not only the one that normally we think about, the idea that which happened before, what has a very important impact because lots of wealth from the global south went to the global north and remained in the hands of the richest ones there, but also the modern colonialism and how the financial system and structure works as a modern colonialism, and how this structural unfairness increases inequality so much.
Yeah, exactly. That colonialism, it didn't end with the kind of formal independence of most nations, that it's continued in a kind of modern way. And that coming back to the episode on central banks, for instance, one of the things that we identified in the discussion of kind of modern day colonialism is, for example, some currencies, all in the global north, like the euro, the pound, the yen, that they're all backstopped by the dollar. So effectively that means they can't go bankrupt. If something goes wrong, they know that the dollar will step in to back them up. So those hard currencies massively benefit those economies. So, the rich countries can borrow money much, much more cheaply. Like Britain can borrow money so much more cheaply than Kenya. And then that money can then be invested at much higher rates of interest all over the world. So you've got this transfer of resources continuing all the time in so many different ways. So you see this kind of money being sucked from the global south to the global north. And then I think the other message in that interview with Jason and in the paper was that the money isn't just flowing from the south to the north, but it's flowing from the south to the richest people in the global north. You know, the majority of, again, coming back to my country, the majority of British people did not benefit from colonialism in the 19th century. You know, they were also living in terrible conditions. Most of the robbery from India went straight into the bank accounts of the super rich. And even today, we're still seeing a problem where most of the money, when Kenya is paying its debts back to private creditors in London and New York, those private creditors are among the richest people in the world. So you've still got this flow of money from south to north and from poor people in the global south to rich people in the global north.
Yeah, Max. And something that also is important to highlight from the interview with Jason and from the report Takers Not Makers is that the same way that the money was going from the global south to the hands of a few richest people in the global north, they have a face and they have a color. The majority of these people were men and they are white. And then when we go back to the global south and we look at who are the people who are mostly explored, they also have a face and a color. And they are normally mostly women. They are normally mostly Afro-descendant people or indigenous people. So we can say that there is a lot of racism and gender issues when you look at colonialism and the impacts that this has. So it's all kinds of inequalities, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think with that interview was great on that. So, I mean, if I'm honest though, I mean, probably my favorite episode, neither of us were involved in. The ones we did were amazing. Don't get me wrong. But my favourite one was probably the one with Nick Shaxson that Annie and Naf did just recently. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. No, we need to admit that they were brilliant in this interview. It was amazing how Annie and Naf, they were speaking so clearly and connected and bringing the ideas and connecting them. I have to admit that they did a fantastic job there and so much worth it. And then there is Nick Shaxson, who has the superpower of telling his stories. It's amazing to hear him because we start hearing the examples and the stories that he tells. And then we realize that we are learning so much. And that's what happened there. I learned a lot about monopoly power in this episode. And one story that really caught my attention was when he was talking about examples of monopoly power, and he went on to talk about food, because this is something that we have every day. So we have breakfast, lunch, and we eat, and we don't think about that. But the way that the food now is owned everywhere by very few companies is something very worrying. And how seeds are not be able to reproduce anymore. So how are we even going to be able to grow our food? This is really important, and the impact of this monopoly power on the food sector is very relevant. And Nick is fantastic to tell this.
I agree, totally. I mean, it's a good storyteller, but he also, it's this sense that whichever bit of your life you look at, whichever sector of the economy you're engaging with, he even talks about vets, doesn't he? When I think his cat was sick or something. Even the vets that look after animals have been consolidated. Now you've only got 2 or 3 chains of vets that dominate the world. So this kind of concentration of power is in markets is everywhere. And I think the other thing that's really interesting about that issue is it's obviously it's something that the left would talk about, but also there are lots of people on the kind of liberal right who see real problems with too much market power. This is not about free markets. It's about quite the opposite. In fact, one of our other guests, Grace, talks about capitalist planning, in her interview, this idea that, the idea that there's a free market is a myth, and in fact, increasingly our whole economies are planned, but they're not planned in the traditional kind of state-led sense. They're planned by enormous corporations that dominate every sector of our lives and create immense wealth. The link between billionaires and monopolies is really, really powerful. I think that episode of Monopoly Power was a joy to listen to, but super, super interesting too.
Yeah,
It
and
wasn't completely negative, was it? He had some good solutions.
yes. And while we hear the stories that he tells, when we end up here realizing how monopoly power and corporates fools billionaires' wealth, undermines democracy, and worsen the climate crisis. But he brings, as you are saying here, he kind of brings solutions that we can have. For example, the role of the state and regulatory policies. And that it's not just something that we are saying, oh, we might do this, but something that has already worked, right?
Yeah, very similar to the taxation story in that, we've been here before. We've had situations of massive corporate power and monopolies have been broken up. The situation has been solved by active intervention by governments and we can do it again. In the same way that we used to tax the rich in the global north, it used to be quite normal for corporates to pay a 50% tax rate. So the sense in which we can get back to there and the kind of positive possibility was something that came across really strongly and left me with hope that this isn't an impossible problem and that we could fix it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, but we had much more interviews, right?
Yeah, I mean, there were loads. There were, I think, 11 or 12 episodes, and they're just some of the highlights. I mean, I love the one we did with Isabel Fry from South Africa, partly because I used to live in South Africa and has a real place in my heart. And her analysis of inequality in South Africa, particularly with the G20 there this year, I thought was incredibly insightful and really, really worth listening to. How about you? Any others you liked?
Yes, there was one that we did with Simon Johnson. He is a Nobel Prize and a professor at the MIT. And we were talking about artificial intelligence and its impacts on inequality. Does it reduce or increase inequality? It was quite a provoking interview. And it's really important to see that things are not decided, they are in progress, and we have a huge role to play to make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't increase inequality and doesn't worsen the climate crisis.
Yes, that episode on AI was super, super interesting. I really learned a lot that I didn't know from that one, and it was really sobering. Definitely worth listening to the artificial intelligence one. So lots and lots of really good episodes. So everyone do go back and have a listen. We are wrapping this season for a little while, not least because our producer Simon is about to go on paternity leave for his first child, which is very exciting, and lots of things going on. So we are going to be back in early September, and we're going to be lining up a lot of amazing interviews for then. So, tune in then for a new season of Equals. And really, if you have the time, go back and listen to some of these great episodes because they're super, super interesting.
Yes, I really hope that you take the moment or use a moment of your day, like, I don't know, running, walking, washing the dishes, to listen to some of these episodes. Lots of interesting people, interviews, and bold solutions for us to reduce inequality. Really looking forward to get back and talk to you in September with Equals Season 8. We are planning lots of interesting interviews, so see you.
Yes, looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody, and see you in a little while.